This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and this is the 2016 Razer Blade. Again, we just reviewed it in June, and there's already a refresh, but it's a very important refresh. This has the NVIDIA GTX 1060 graphics inside. That's Pascal, 10 series generation, lots faster. So that's pretty exciting stuff. Otherwise, it's the same Razer Blade we know and love, so I'm not going to go over every detail because you've probably already seen my previous video, or you can watch that if you want to know every single thing about it in detail. We're going to look at it now. It's back, and it might look identical to the Razer Blade 14-inch that we just reviewed in June of 2016, but there's a refresh for November, and it's an important refresh because it adds NVIDIA 10 series Pascal graphics, specifically the NVIDIA GTX 1060, which is a lot more powerful than the 970M that was in the model we reviewed before. Since it's so much the same, I'm not going to do a super long detailed review of every aspect of this. You can always watch our June review to learn anything that you feel like you might be missing here. In a nutshell, one CPU option, 2.6 GHz quad core, 45 watt i7-6700HQ CPU. That's the same one used in every gaming laptop and the Dell XPS 15 and a few other mobile workstation sort of machines. 16 gigs of DDR4 RAM soldered on board. You can't upgrade it. That's the only capacity they ship it in now. It has NVIDIA Optimus, so it's switchable graphics with Intel HD 530, so that can get you some better battery life when you're just doing regular productivity tasks unplugged. Not gaming, not video editing, that sort of thing. That's when the dedicated GPU will get called into action. PCIe NVMe SSD M2 standard form factor, upgradable if you want to open it up, which is easy to do. Torx T5 screws on the bottom, remove them, and you have access to the SSD, so you can get it with 256, 512 gig, so on. You get the idea. About $200 if you want to move up from the 256 to the 512 gig SSD. It's aluminum unibody. It looks sort of like a black MacBook, and that's not a bad thing. 14-inch screen, available 1080p, 1920 by 1080 IPS matte non-touch display, which is the one we have in this time. And I'm kind of excited because I like it better than the QHD Plus 3200 by 1800 PLS display that we had in the previous model. Even though that one was a touchscreen, glossy, that I didn't love, but touchscreen part was nice. I'm going to miss that, but you'll find out why I like the 1080p model better. Killer Wi-Fi, 1535 AC is standard. That's a good wireless card. Pleases me. 2 megapixel webcam, so better than average if you want to do some Twitch gaming or just have better looking Skype footage. And as ever, loud stereo speakers, pretty impressive sounding ones at that, and 7.1 sound audio output via the audio jack. Port selection is actually pretty good for a 14-inch laptop this thin and this light. By the way, 4.16 pounds for the 1080p screen, 4.3 pounds for the QHD Plus touchscreen. We have 3 USB 3.0 ports in bright green, and they're on both sides, so that gives you a little versatility. A Thunderbolt 3/USB-C Gen 2 port, and full-size HDMI, a lock slot, and a headphone jack. So decent selection. It's no SD card slots still. I don't know what's going on with SD card slots this year, but it is more legacy ports, obviously, than something like the latest MacBook Pro model. So now you can see how it literally sizes up against the competition. This is the late 2016 15-inch MacBook Pro. 15-inch versus 14-inch, so it's going to have a little bit bigger footprint. A little bit thinner here. Obviously, the Mac has only USB-C and Thunderbolt 3 ports, no regular USBs, no HDMI, all that sort of thing. You're going to need dongle adapters. And it has AMD Radeon 450, 455, or 460 graphics, depending on what you decide to order. Less powerful considerably than the 1060 card, but Apple certainly doesn't intend this to be a gaming laptop. This is more for pro apps and that sort of thing. And for another interesting comparison, this is the Asus ROG Strix GL502VS. This is running actually with the GTX 1070 card, so a faster card. Though it's also available with the 1060, 15-inch, so it's going to be bigger again. And it has more of a gaming laptop aesthetic going on. Obviously, it's relatively thin and light for your traditional gaming laptop, but obviously not as pretty and not as small as the Razer Blade. But you get a whole lot more ports too, and this weighs about 5.5 pounds, so it's still not all that heavy. And you have Ethernet, SD card slot, USB, regular USB, you have DisplayPort, you got everything on this. So if you're looking for something that runs quieter and cooler, generally speaking, and has all the ports and is still kind of portable, this one would be an alternative. And this goes for around $1,700 with the GTX 1070 and around $1,300 or so with the 1060. So this display is really nice looking. It just has a luminous and colorful quality to it that makes you think that it's going to really measure even higher than it does. In fact, it measures quite similarly in many ways to the QHD Plus display, which was in the last model that we reviewed. This one's obviously matte, which is nice, so no reflections, and the viewing angles on this are actually better than the QHD Plus model. So that's plus number one. It covers the full sRGB color gamut. It manages 75% of Adobe RGB. So that's pretty much the same as the QHD Plus and the same as most premium laptops on the market. Contrast here, however, is better. It's 302 nits of brightness, a 0.43 black level at max brightness, and that works out to 700:1 contrast, which is almost double the QHD Plus model. So that gives it a sharpness and a pop that are much appreciated, and that combined with the wider viewing angles mean that even though I like touchscreens, I would forego it. And I would get this 1080p model and save yourself some money. Same keyboard as the last time we looked at it, and that's a fine thing. 1.3 millimeter key travel, I wouldn't mind more to be honest, but it's a pretty crisp and responsive keyboard. And Chroma backlighting, so you can customize it. There's a bunch of different preset light shows here, so you can have as much fun as you want playing with those light shows first, or program it as you see fit. And yes, you can just make it all white or all blue if you want it to look kind of staid at work. And with that lid logo there, if you're worried about that, well, I would get a decal of some sort to cover that up if you really need to go incognito at work. Trackpad is a very good glass trackpad, Synaptics with actual real clickers, which I like, except for in the dark. Sometimes, you can't really find them because there's no LED lighting around the trackpad or anything like that. So much for that part. And here's what the internals look like. We've removed many really tiny Torx T5 screws. Don't do this when you think you might sneeze. Don't let your cat in the room, God forbid, or your curious 3-year-old, because these things are teeny, they're light, they go anywhere. So inside we have what looks pretty much just like the model we reviewed 6 months back. This looks maybe a little bit more beefy over here than before, but you've got your fans, you've got your copper heat sinks, lots of cooling going on here. Here's your SSD, it's socketed M2 slot right there's your connector to put that in. Again, it's a PCIe NVMe SSD there. And we have the socketed Wi-Fi card, which is the killer 1535 AC card, a good card. These RAM chips right here are soldered on board, so you can't upgrade the memory, but it ships with 16 gigs of DDR4 RAM on all models, so that's plenty for most folks unless you really need to run multiple VMs. You're running scientific simulations. You know who you are if you think you're going to use more than 16 gigs, but probably for the target audience, folks who are going to be doing some video editing with Premiere and playing games, it's fine. Now here's the bottom cover. It's pretty rigid and stable. It is metal, of course. One thing to note, when you put this back on, make sure you get your screw tension matching with all of these screws. I know some of you with the model that was released in May, June of this year noticed some wobble when it was flat on the table, and you can actually introduce that yourself if you don't get your screw tensions just right. So if you notice it wobbles when it didn't before you opened it up, just play with the screw tensions. So performance, again, Core i7 2.6 gigahertz 45 watt and NVIDIA GTX 1060 graphics. That's the same as the MSI Stealth Pro GS63 VR we recently reviewed, and a couple of other laptops. And I know some people were concerned, they thought there'd be thermal throttling here and the scores wouldn't be as good, but it's pretty much neck and neck with offerings from MSI in the same performance and, roughly speaking, thin and light category, though the MSI is a bigger 15.6-inch footprint. So here's our 3D Mark 11 score, excellent right there. Extreme score, what we would expect to see. Cloud gate, you get the idea. It's all good stuff here and significantly faster than the outgoing model. And you can see our benchmark graph here for the comparisons between models that compete with the 1060 and also with the last generation model. Now in terms of CPU and GPU heat, It's about the same as the last generation model, and CPU is the same. That's expected there, but the GPU is about the same as well. We ran at about 80 degrees to 82 degrees centigrade when gaming with this, with games like Battlefield 1 and Fallout 4. And ambient temperature this time of year is about 70 degrees. So actually it's a little bit cooler ambient temperature than the last time we reviewed this for us. So perhaps if it was as hot as it was in June in Texas, well, it might go up to 85 degrees. So that's toasty. That's not near the thermal limit. That's not near the throttling limit. And the CPUs typically were about 65 to 75 centigrade when gaming. So a lot toastier than something like the Alienware 15R3 we just reviewed, but that's a 7.7 pound laptop with a huge footprint compared to this. So it's par for the course. If you look at something like the MSI Phantom or the Stealth Pro, which are very thin and light gaming laptops, you're going to see similar thermals. So here's the charger, 165 watt, one of the most compact chargers you're going to find with that many watts, and the usual leather daddy man bracelet, right, going on here to keep it all tidy. 165 watts, that's really a bit less than it should be. 180 watts is usually what you'd see the quad-core CPU and this graphics card paired with, so that means the charger is going to get hot. I haven't seen it discharge when gaming, though, unlike the Asus ROG Strix GL502 VS that can sometimes drop 5% an hour if you're gaming hard with it and you have the GTX 1070 for that model there. So, thumbs up for portability, but we'd like to see maybe a little bit more wattage so this thing doesn't get so hot. So how about battery life? With the 970M model that we reviewed back in June, we were pretty impressed. It got up to 6 hours, particularly if doing a lot of streaming video, because Intel chipset's so well optimized for that. Between 5 and 6 hours generally, and that's the same thing that we're seeing here. This is for light productivity use. I'm talking about Word, streaming some stuff from Netflix, editing a few Photoshop raw files, that sort of thing. I don't mean gaming. If you're playing games, probably more like 2 hours, though. So you're going to get your full horsepower when plugged in. I would plug in when gaming. But if you're using this for video editing on the road, unplugged, that sort of thing, yeah, look at more like 3.5 to 4 hours, because that's pretty demanding stuff of the battery. So that's the late 2016 Razer Blade. Still as thin and light and powerful as ever. 14 inches, beautiful black unibody design. Loves fingerprints, but hey, that's okay. Certainly an incredible amount of performance, and it might tempt some MacBook Pro shoppers away because it is an awful lot faster and quite compact too compared to the 15-inch that it would compete against. Yes, it's still noisy. Yes, it still gets hot when you're playing games for several hours, but you know, that's the price we pay for every single super thin and light laptop on the planet that does also game. And this is still one of the smallest. The MSI Phantom is still the only other one that really competes in terms of size and weighs a little bit less, but is more plasticky. We have a smackdown with that one too, in case you want to know. Anyway, yes, it's a nice machine. Go ahead and buy it if you're cool with the heat, if you're cool with the noise. It is fast. It is beautiful. It has a pretty good keyboard on it. Lovely displays too. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to visit our website for the full written review. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for more cool tech videos, and thumbs up if you liked it.